This guy was sent to a doomed academy, but not as a student, as a teacher. Here, the principal was addicted to gambling, while the students were demons in the bodies of children. The teachers were incompetent and couldn't even teach magic. But Amon arrived with a different methodology, determined to turn these students into true battle machines. In the capital city of Arzia, a black-haired young man says, "So this is it," and the starting point was a success, standing in awe in front of the academy. This was Amanith, the general education institution created by the great emperor. It boasts an excellent faculty and an efficient curriculum befitting its grand scale. Due to its extensive history, many noble children wish to attend this academy. And to think that he, the second son of a country noble, managed to become a teacher at Amanith Academy and must build connections and support his family, until someone calls his name. An old man says he looks like a newbie and wants to know if he was stalling to move the luggage. The protagonist says he was the teacher, but the old man keeps insisting he carry the baggage. So the young man wonders what's going on and if this is some kind of joke, and questions if the academy is being remodeled, but the old man wants to know what he was talking about, since the academy director's investment went wrong and she lost all her money and went bankrupt. The protagonist says this was the first time he even heard about it, and the old man questions what sense does it make for a worker to know all the details. Amon says he was saying he's a teacher, but he notices something in the corner, wondering how there's a beggar on the school grounds. Judging by how no one is saying anything, he's an employee, and in that case, he'll hand these things over to this guy and bolt, so he calls him and says he shouldn't be doing that there. But the old man gets irritated right away, yelling that this is his book, and Amon questions why. That man says he was a teacher there, and the protagonist is confused about what kind of drunk this is. The teacher tells him to return the book, and the old man questions if he went crazy, since he was stealing things instead of doing what he told him to do, and handed him this box to carry. The teacher orders the thief to return the book. Amon just yells that he was there as a teacher. The misunderstanding was established, and the teacher explains they said the news of the academy's suspension was sent through the portal, but Amon didn't receive it. Anyway, the royal family recommended suspending operations, so most of the students and teachers left. But he shouldn't worry too much. There are still some people remaining there, and it's not like it went completely bankrupt, and Amon thinks anyone proves otherwise. That man presents the teacher's lounge, saying the interior is simple because he stole all his items, and Amon says if he says that one more time, he'll steal again. He seems discouraged with the current state of the academy, but doing this with the office is a bit too much. That teacher replies he was drinking this because it tastes good. Amon gets even more irritated with this, hitting his head with the bottle. The teacher questions what he thinks he's doing. Then the protagonist walks forward. Baron Drake's house deep in the countryside. It's only a barony in name, since despite the territory in the name, it's nothing more than a small village belonging to a desperate and poor family. His father mobilized all connections to get this position, and the period was 3 years, and if it's not completed, he'll have to pay a fine. Amon looks out the window thinking he thinks he's screwed, but there's still hope since there are 2 students and 2 other teachers left now. Now that things have come to this point, he has to worry about the students, and maybe some heir of a prominent family stayed there. Then he'll be able to make good connections, but contrary to that determination, the 2 students turned out not to be viable targets. Boris, student number 1, says he has nowhere to go back to since his village disappeared 2 years ago. Chloe, the second student, says she came from the Arain kingdom to study abroad, but that nation fell to ruin after last year's war. Amon thinks this is how his life is going to be, but says he understands and they don't need to worry because the teacher is here. The 2 get emotional right after, hugging him while the protagonist thinks he's screwed, but he calls the 2 right after, wanting to know if that giant caterpillar on the table is something they're raising. They tell him it was their fencing teacher. Amon says he understood, but the teacher calls the newbie, saying the director is looking for him and he should go visit her, and the children should go back if self-study period is over. Amon wonders what the director who hired these crazy teachers looks like, and is going to take a look with his own eyes. In the director's office, Annarelle introduces herself right away. Amon does the same and says he's assuming the position today, and thinks she seems pretty normal. And it was a magazine in the elven lineage in her hand. She questions whether between meeting George and stealing slugs, he wants to know which he thinks is better, and Amon talks about stealing tables. The woman says then 10 gold coins on stealing slugs, and Amon questions if it's by any chance a horse racing magazine. Annarelle denies it since a noble elf would never be participating in something so barbaric, since it was a slug race. It was recently gaining popularity among elves, and it's a race where giant slugs climb the world tree. They said they're going to host a competition, so she was looking for somewhere to invest, and at that moment some words pass through Amon's mind about the director's investment having gone wrong, so he touches her shoulder, asking if she's putting operational expenses at stake, and Annarelle says she can just win and pay it all back. But the protagonist takes the magazine from her, saying she should be asking what she thinks she's doing, taking the academy's operational expenses to gamble, and how can she even call herself a director? They say the odds of winning are low, but Anarel says not to judge a gambler's potential. Amon says she should be thinking about the academy, and if she wants to bet, then she should do it with her own money. And please give it up because he won't tolerate her using operational expenses to make bets. Wanting to know what she was wanting to invest in, and she says in the banana orchard. Dragon bananas are considered a high-quality crop and take 3 years to grow sprouts and 12 to bear fruit, so it takes a long time by human standards. She says if she waits just 15 years, she can earn 10 times the Academy's operational expenses, and the average lifespan of the elven race is over 1,000 years. Eamon repeats about her having said just 15 years, and gets even more irritated with this, yelling that she was an idiot elf. She should just watch because he'll flee this dump of an academy, even if he has to ruin the academy. Later, he returns to the room and announces his name. Anarel tells him to please come in, and questions what business he has to deal with this idiot elf. Eamon says he thought about the investment she was planning as director of this prestigious academy, and she shouldn't have spent so much money on the slug race. If she really put all that money into it, she must have done it for the academy's future, and Anarel says of course. Eamon comments that he was foolish not to have noticed this, and ended up attacking her, and he sincerely apologizes, and Anarel says she'll let it pass this time and he should be careful. The protagonist says that regarding this, he got a little interested in slug racing since it's popular among the wise elves who live for so long. Anarel suggests they watch one together, and Eamon questions about this. Elves are known as a sacred and beautiful race and who live in a village where the world tree is located. This image could be a rumor someone spread around since they're the complete opposite. Eamon thinks they're not elves but wild mountain beasts. Anarel yells right after, but the teacher calls her, wanting to know when this is going to start. The director says it already started, but the protagonist wasn't seeing any difference. From the elves' point of view, it was something completely frantic. Anarel yells that the slug was overtaken. From the human's point of view, they were just slow slugs climbing up. The protagonist thinks he wants to go home. A narrator says all participants seem to be in good condition, and it's impossible to predict who will win, while Eamon thinks about this, thinking they're slow as hell, and he doesn't even know if this will end today. Yelling that participant Hana was falling behind. Eamon thinks he was tired. A few hours later, Anarel says, "This is Super Mom." Her glamorous appearance when she climbed the world tree was still fresh in her memory, and Eamon questions if she bet again. So those numbers must be the betting odds. Anarel asks if he knows why she was keeping an eye on those two, and the protagonist says her perception was sharp, with a sarcastic tone. The protagonist says he likes this little guy, and he should bet on him because it's sad to be the weakest. Hana the Slug is also a professional who entered the world tree after going through rigorous training, but he's only judged and looked down upon. This slowness can be overcome with the expectations and confidence of others. With their faith, they can make Hana the Slug a proud winner. And on top of that, the odds are 500 to 1. If he's a member of the Great Forest race, he has to bet big. Anarel says he's right and will bet on him. The protagonist asks who was crying, waking up right after, and noticing the race had ended. Seeing the director cry so sadly, it seems like the academy went down the drain. Everything was going according to plan. Once the academy goes bankrupt, he can go home without any penalty. So he asks the director to calm down and questions what they can do since things ended up this way. They'll return to the academy and discuss future matters, but the narrator announces that the winner of the race was Hana the Slug. Anarel bursts out laughing. The narrator continues that surprisingly, only one person managed to predict Hana the Slug's victory. And that's why Hana the Slug himself asked to shake hands with the one who believed in him and should come to the front of the world tree. The protagonist screams in agony after all the scenes of the slug sliming him, completely unresponsive while Anarel is happy. Back at the academy, she says it was an honor, and the protagonist comments that elves die young. But by the way, he wants to know what she'll do with the 5,000 gold she won. Anarel says it'll be used for operational expenses since she's still the director. She wants to make the current decadent academy return to its glory days. Now that they've cut support from the imperial family, they have to raise the expenses themselves. Questioning what she means, Eamon summarizes that she's talking about investing the money. He yells that this idiot elf has completely lost her mind, but he agrees the academy can't be rebuilt by conventional methods. Her investment idea isn't wrong. What matters is where she'll invest. In the Golden Road Commerce, she asks about the blatant temple construction project because it seems good. Eamon replies, "It's not that great," since the temple will be built in a newly developed place and the pagans might get out of control. Anirul says she understands, and Amon continues that he needs to excuse himself for a bit since he needs to go to the bathroom, going outside and excusing himself, because he's going to invest 2 gold in the blatant temple construction project, thinking that even if the return is low now, it was an investment with a promising future since it has many believers and is dedicated to Blatant, the god of war. Back in the room, Anirul says he seemed to be in quite a hurry and looks much better. Anyway, since she can't understand it no matter how much she tries to look at it, she thinks it's better for him to do it alone since she'll trust him. Eamon thinks he'll give her the opportunity to go bankrupt, so he says that's good. Anirul says it was Mango King, and after calling him an idiot, this is a high-quality harvest, like dragon banana, but Eamon says it takes 2 years for the shoots to sprout and 5 more years to bear fruit. But she should think about it. The imperial family wouldn't want a decaying academy in operation. That's why he was against dragon bananas since 15 years is risky. On the other hand, it only takes 7 years for Mango King to grow, and that's less than half the time it takes for Dragon Banana to grow. Anirul says she heard 7 years is a long time for humans, and he'd end up suffering along with them. The protagonist thinks he'll use this opportunity to escape from the academy, and says that for humans, that's right. But she'll protect the academy until the end, so this investment will be only for his good and the academy's. Anirul covers her mouth, calling Professor Amon. They're going to invest 4,900 gold and keep 100 gold for minimum operation costs. Amon thinks it was expected and was impressed by her decision. At the Mango King farm, a man questions if it's really true, calling out God's name happily, since the heavens had helped them. The next morning in front of Amonith Academy, Eamon questions, but what? Wanting to know what these letters are. One for the investor of the Blatant Temple construction project, and another for the investor of the Mango King farm. The drunk professor walks through the city saying that was good, and as expected, that bar owner was very good at choosing drinks, stopping in front of the school right after, and wondering why there's a black dog sleeping there, throwing an octopus tentacle as a snack. It hits Amon's face right after, getting deeply irritated by the stench of alcohol. The professor walks away and says he earned 10 good deed points today, so he can have 1 more bottle. Anirul finds Eamon and asks why he was sleeping there, wanting to know why there are sea tentacles there, and says he must be starving. A bit earlier, he read the letter from the farm chief thanking him for showing interest in his Mango King. They developed a method that allows cultivation in 1 year. As a result, they plan to transfer part of their profits for the next 10 years to him, and would like to offer a taste of the Mango King that was produced in the prototype. May only the brightest lights illuminate their path ahead. Eamon says, so this. Seeing the letter from Blatant Temple canceling since due to a rebellion, they went bankrupt. The protagonist becomes completely enraged at losing this money, falling to the ground unconscious right after. Anirul hands him a Mango King smoothie in elf style made with the new prototype that just arrived, and says the professor should have said he was hungry. Eamon asks what she's talking about, but the elf deflects. The protagonist drinks it right after, getting happy because it was extremely delicious, and thinks there's no way the mango business will go bankrupt. It was a big mistake, but Anirul calls him, saying she'll give 1 gold as a special bonus since he played a major role in the slug race and the investment's success. If it were up to her, she'd love to give more, but she can't spend the academy's operational expenses as she pleases. Eamon wonders about this since she was the one who lost everything, but it won't be easy to ruin the academy now that funding has been secured. He was stuck there for 3 years, so saving the academy is the best choice. But he wants to know how he can save the academy when none of its staff are right in the head. Later at a bar, he slams a wine glass on the table. The bartender says that startled him. He'll break the table like that. Wanting to know what brings a young man there in broad daylight, Eamon comments that he barely got this position. From his boss to his colleagues, they're all lunatics, and the road will be difficult. The drunk professor recognizes him right after. Amon says they met there and hopes he didn't hear, but the professor says he wants to sit next to him for a moment, as a lunatic. The protagonist says that thinking about it, they didn't introduce themselves. Mario says he was responsible for the magic class, but Amon squeezes his hand hard. Mario yells that no matter how much he hates him, he shouldn't try to crush his hand, but the protagonist says he just shook his hand, thinking about Mario Rumdum because he thinks he's heard that name somewhere. The professor asks why he was sighing so much. Eamon says it's because the academy's future is grim. Mario hugs him and asks if he knows what the academy's role is. The protagonist suggests it's to teach students. That professor says that as long as there are students, the academy's future will never be grim, even if it's just the 2 of them. Eamon calls him Mr. Mario, thinking he speaks well even when dead drunk. Then he comments that it's difficult to operate the academy the way it is, as expected from being without the royal family's support, until a young marine competition offered by the emperor can be seen from afar, and a chief orders to remove that thing since there's an academy that was destroyed. Aemon notices this and thinks a little, since the biggest challenge for Amonith Academy right now is the imperial family's recommendation to suspend operations. But you know what? If they manage to perform well in the competition managed by the emperor himself, he might even withdraw the recommendation to suspend operations. So Aemon rushes to the poster. With the closing of the bar, the old man congratulates everyone for working hard. One of the employees warns that the counter table was cracked. Wondering what kind of bastard broke it, it was Aemon slamming his cup. The protagonist thinks he still has some time left before the competition, so he decided to attend his fellow teachers' classes, calling out to the Sunbae, who only responds that she's going to sleep. The protagonist asks her name, and the woman responds that it was Sloth Field. Aemon recognizes that the family leader is a great swordsman, and the family is famous for having only master swordsman descendants, so this person must also be good. Saying it's class time, and Sloth says she understood and to stop poking at her. It's not like she was being paid by a ruined academy, so she doesn't need to work, and comments that he was very strong. Aemon questions why she wouldn't be paid, and hands over a bag of gold, informing her that this is Professor Field's weekly salary. Surprisingly, Sloth's skills were very good. Aemon wonders why she's hugging that sleeping bag, and if she was hiding food, but Sloth comments that he still doesn't have a subject. The protagonist says the director said it would be good to observe, and personally he'd like to teach history. Sloth thinks it suits him since he doesn't look imposing and has an ordinary physique. Judging by the way he walks and his posture, it doesn't seem like he's been trained in martial arts. Sloth says he seems to have never learned swordsmanship, and Aemon confirms, so the teacher suggests he try to see, but he'd be happy to learn from Sunbae after being smacked on the head by her, while both think it'll be good. Aemon asks if she's going to do this while holding the sleeping bag, and Sloth comments that it's just a light little fight anyway, and thinks she'll win with just one hand against a little chicken. But the protagonist swings his sword at insane speed. Sloth wonders why he's so fast, and didn't even feel traces of mana in his body. But still, he's just a beginner swordsman, and there's no need to get flustered. Throwing the sleeping bag to the side, Aemon advances with another strike, but the teacher loses her balance on top of the sleeping bag, slamming hard on the ground right after. She asks for time and for him not to come near her. Aemon stops the sword in front of her, saying she should have put away the sleeping bag. Sloth calls him a little shit and thinks she doesn't want to use sword aura against a civilian. But since things have reached this point, she'll go the coward's way, and Amon recognizes it immediately. Sloth says it was sword aura, and the protagonist says it was the first time seeing it in real life. He was from the Drake territory of the Arma Mountains. Sloth recognizes they were located at the end of the continent, and Aemon says there's a plain beyond the mountains, and the teacher calls that the Garden of Silence, asking if he walked all the way from the Arma Mountains to there, and Amon responds that it took about 2 weeks on foot. The teacher says it must be an area with many monsters, and the protagonist vents that it's a huge headache since they always destroy the potato fields. But they just take their lives, and Sloth comments that there doesn't seem to be any night in that territory, and wants to know how they manage. Aemon responds that they lose their lives when cut with axes. The teacher wonders what's his deal, and the protagonist wonders if he said something wrong, commenting that there's something wrong with her expression, and he doesn't know why but wants to learn a bit of swordsmanship. However, Sloth warns she won't teach, calling the children back to class, and Amon wonders what's wrong with her. In the second period of Mario's magic theory class, he asks where they stopped last time. Boris warns they stopped on page 21, so the teacher comments about what he said regarding the key of this magic circle facilitating mana flow. Amon wonders why he's so good, with Mario analyzing that the Archmage developed this magic circle. It's something they might not understand with words, but he'll show them, and the protagonist questions if he can use magic while drunk like this. A green energy radiates from Mario's hand, gathering around runic writings in an orb. Amon thinks that now that he stopped to think, he saw his name. It had appeared in the newspaper before, with Mario demonstrating the type of magic. A mage who belonged to a famous magic tower and single-handedly destroyed an enemy Knight Corps in the final battle. The war hero, Mario Rumdum. At least that's what the article said, and his face resembles the newspaper portrait even though he's old now. And so that's why he can give a great class despite being intoxicated. He'd be perfect if it weren't for his drinking addiction. At that moment, a certain assumption passed through Aemon's mind, since if he can teach so well even while drunk, it would be even better if he weren't. Calling the teacher and says he has a question. Mario thinks it was just when his class was going so well, and just by looking he knows he's up to something. Saying he doesn't want to answer, but the protagonist pulls him. Warning, it was for the sake of his dignity, while Mario tries to argue, but Amon warns the children to take notes. Both follow the master's orders, but they hear screams from afar. Mario questions why he punched his stomach out of nowhere and should respect his elders. The children are scared by what was happening. Mario leaves right after saying this will leave many scars, and he punched his stomach to sober up, but never saw such a barbaric method in his entire life, and Amon apologizes since in his territory everyone does this. The teacher questions who taught such a cruel method, and the protagonist says his father taught him, but Mario says it's efficient. Thanks to him, he was completely sober now. So they'll continue his class, and the protagonist thinks for him to show his true abilities. But it was a complete disaster, without remembering the information. Amon wonders about this, and if he can only teach normally when he's drunk but wants to know what the hell is this he's doing. So Mario asks the students for a little moment, drinking his wine right after. Amon thinks for him not to do this in front of the children. Mario continues explaining that thanks to Amagoto Molin's magic circle, human magic managed to grow rapidly, but the person who managed to improve it was another. His name was Johto Molin, and they both must memorize since it'll be on the test. Amon just thinks it was all good since he's good at teaching anyway. After class, Mario says that as expected, drinking like this was even better. The protagonist says he has a serious question this time, and Mario gets startled. Amon comments that he's the Mario who fought in the Great War and heard a lot about him, but he has a question about his class just now. Since the corners of the pentagram are the key, but if they follow Johto's version, the efficiency is reduced by half since the trajectory of mana flow is misaligned, so it would be better to simplify the magic circle making the vertices square. Mario questions if he learned magic before, and Amon responds that his father is a mage, so he knows a bit of magic theory when he was younger. The teacher thinks that something at this level could earn a first-class medal at the Magic Tower, since he can find errors just by looking and plan improvements, shouting that he knows nothing. And he was leaving now, while Amon asks him to wait, wondering what's wrong with him. The swordsmanship and magic classes as teaching quality are definitely satisfactory, and they need special training. He hates to admit it, but the children's abilities are significantly lower than the teachers, and at this rate nobody will win, and they'll be lucky to compete. But anyway, he opens a smile, since the Academy's restaurant was very good, and to think he'd get a birthday meal for such a low price. But he notices the teacher's empty seats. To ease the awkwardness from before, it would be good to sit with his colleagues, but he wants to know why they were avoiding him. Mario says she also agrees. Sloth comments that he said he can take the life of high-risk monsters even without knowing anything, so if he ends up learning, it'll be absurd, and they think their small livelihood will be in danger. This was the moment the alliance not to teach Amon was born, forbidding the transfer of any technique to Amon. The professor approaches the children, wanting to know if he could sit there, and both confirm. Amon congratulates the two on their hard work this morning, and thinks they were the only ones who noticed his effort, so he comments about the upcoming competition, wanting to know if they'll participate since it would be a good learning experience and something that lasts a lifetime, so they can gain some experience together. But Boris stays silent, warning that he won't participate. There's no chance a commoner like him could compete against nobles. Amon says there are many nobles with commoner backgrounds, and the boy says that makes them incredible. The protagonist thinks he screwed everything up. Boris questions what he, a mere commoner, could do, and Amon thinks the sanest person there thinks so little of himself, holding the boy's hand next, and telling him that when he was younger, his nickname was Amon the Cowardly Chicken. But he thinks it was actually Amon of the Hot Fist since he made all the villagers treat him well with his fists. However, he continues the lie saying that now he's an academy professor, and not just anyone can do that. But the truth is that given the current circumstances, anyone could become a professor at this academy. Besides, if he participates and works hard in the competition, he might end up becoming a noble too, and will be able to eat this delicious food every day. Thinking that in his territory they could only eat potatoes, Boris eats the meat, and Amon questions if he wants to become a noble. The boy confirms next, and the protagonist thinks he's ambitious, and was happy he's clinging to his purpose for coming to the academy, commenting that they don't have class this afternoon, and he'll give a special lesson in history and general studies, and in return they must work hard. Boris says he'll do his best, and the protagonist turns to Chloe, getting surprised right after. Boris explains that she was scared since she's afraid of crowds specifically. Amon thinks there will be thousands of spectators during the competition, and it's better to just give up on cowards, so he says Chloe doesn't need to try hard, but she says she wants to. She wants to overcome this part of herself. Amon thinks she'll become a stepping stone to his success, and warns they'll meet in the training room after a brief rest after lunch. Until that moment, Chloe and Boris had no idea of the path they had chosen. Amon runs with the children, saying a healthy body houses a healthy mind. The children follow him completely exhausted. Sloth asks how many laps they've done, and Mario says it's been about 89, but both fall, saying they can't take it anymore. Eamon thinks these two have worse physical strength than he imagined, and so they should rest a bit and go to the magical theory class. And in the room he explains that's how they proved magic existed. Now he wants to know if they understood everything. The two students comment that it's very difficult, but for Eamon, it was just the basics of magic. Mario says that's not how you teach a class. The protagonist thinks this is the theory he learned when he was just a student, but this is strange and says they'll go back to training to cool their heads. Running with the children while saying a healthy body houses a healthy mind. And he was managing to see their feet failing, but tells them to go faster. The two end up defeated on the ground, and the protagonist thinks kids these days are too weak. Mario calls Professor Amon, wanting to know what he's doing there. Amon thinks they finally showed up for class now and were irresponsible, but just says he was helping them train their stamina. Sloth says he made them run 100 laps around the hall, but the protagonist says they should be capable of that since the room is so small. But he also taught some magical theory, and it's magic basics, so he went over some foundations with them. Both think he was making the poor children train like Spartans, and these things would be difficult even for adults to endure, so they need to stop him at any cost. Eamon says they'll continue the class and asks them both to please leave, but both advance with magic and swordsmanship right after, causing an immense crash on the battlefield. Sloth comments that even 10 laps are difficult, and he thinks 100 makes any sense. The protagonist says that since the mountains are behind the village, he's been going there since he was young, but the teacher tells him not to use his stamina standards. Mario comments that besides he needs to learn magic again from the basics, and Amon tells them his father read these books instead of fairy tales before bed. But they explain, this is an academy where students with different experiences come together, and he was educating based on his personal standards and methods, wanting to know if you can even call this proper education, because he needs to learn the world's standards. Thinking he nailed that line, but Amon thinks he was just an annoying drunk. He hates to admit it, but thinks he's not wrong. Amon's special class curriculum to enter the competition was as follows, with Mario teaching magic, and Amon reviewing what they learned. Amon would develop their stamina, and Sloth will teach swordsmanship based on their stamina level. Mario comments that that idiot is teaching them more systematically than he imagines. Sloth agrees, because making them run to the edge of their limit and then immediately making them wield a sword is perfect for developing their stamina. Before this, all students were heirs of noble families, so many parents protested against their children being disciplined with physical punishments. Mario says this means that idiot Eamon is teaching based on the two's experiences, and Sloth says he didn't imagine a noble wouldn't behave that way, but he was just messing around there. Thus, as a result of much physical fitness training, Eamon says they'll do real combat training. The two students became incredible beasts. At the Amber guard post, Mario says there's Mr. Little Tomato there, and guard Tomoth calls Your Excellency, wanting to know what he's doing there. The professor says he came for the educational purpose of his students, and Tomoth recognizes the identification of Marquis Field. The guard says yes, and asks them to enter. Back at the battle area next, a guard introduces himself as Fit. The teachers announce that today's class is a practical duel against the soldiers of the Amber Guard. Boris says he wants to go first, and Amon says, as expected, he has a great competitive spirit, asking the guard to be careful, and Fit says not to worry because he'll control his strength. But the protagonist says he was telling him to be careful, and Boris advances toward him, dueling swords with the guard. Boris falls to the ground next. Eamon thinks he likes seeing that, and that's exactly it. The acceleration of the lower body after running dozens of laps, together with the swordsmanship of Marquis Field's house taught by Sloth, and the main technique was missing, but his basics are great. Fit thinks this boy was more agile than he thought according to his small physique, but he sees an opening from him. However, Boris dodges, saying he fooled him, advancing once more toward the guard. Boris maintains his serious expression next, hitting the guard's head several times without stopping and without mercy, until the guard loses all his hair and warns that he lost. Everyone comments that the young master is cool, and Boris thinks he really won against an adult who was also a soldier. Amon thinks the training was impeccable, but now it's Chloe's turn to do well, and she confirms. The girl walks there next, getting her scared expression next. She starts seeing all the voices around her and panics, falling to her knees on the ground. The guard wonders what's wrong with that little girl. Chloe thinks as she imagined she can't do it, since there are many eyes toward her. But Eamon questions if she was okay, saying to stay calm because the people there will judge and talk about her anyway after seeing her once. She should consider the strange people as acquaintances with funny faces, for example the potatoes from her homeland. Chloe talks about the familiar things from her homeland, asking if that strange word was looking at her. Eamon questions if she managed to recover her confidence, and the girl says she has to try again. Chloe thinks that thing was looking at her several times. Seeing the guard like this, who asks if he can attack first, Mario says he never thought shy Chloe would be dueling with a guard like this. And this is incredible, wanting to know what advice he gave. And Eamon says he didn't say anything in particular and he's probably a natural educator. Chloe advances once more. The guard dodges the blow, saying she was cute and scary, but Chloe goes at him with the sword. The guard gets scared but ends up getting hit in the abdomen, screaming about his bones, and wanting to know why she keeps hitting the same spot, dropping his sword on the ground. Chloe had won the duel and says that's what he deserves. Everyone celebrates and thinks the children are their saviors. From that day forward, the children dueled against the guards every day. As they became more and more confident, their skills improved, and before they realized it, it was already day one of the competition. Eamon says that since they worked hard, they're going to eat something delicious tonight, and the children celebrate, saying they're going to the arena and only winners can enjoy a delicious meal there. Both are surprised and say the professor can't do something like that. In the arena, people bet against the gladiators. Boris says he's going to tell Sloth he brought them to this place, but Amon says he has her approval and will explain the rules there. The only one is that they'll have to fight barehanded and everything is allowed. Boris argues that they only learned swordsmanship, but Amon questions if he doesn't have a sword. Is he going to sit and twiddle his thumbs? Even in their competition, there's no guarantee they'll fight fairly, touching the boy's head next, and says not to worry too much and trust what he learned and believe in himself. Boris calls Professor Eamon, but thinks he doesn't even believe in what he taught. A man from above asks if they're students, and aside from Viscount Rumdum, he's never seen any of the others before. They were idiots since this place isn't for little kids. The fight between Egg Crusher and Boris was about to begin. The boy wonders what he should do. He looked really strong, with the Crusher wanting to know what a snotty brat was doing there, and fights with all his strength even against children. Eamon had said before that they're not strong since they're at an immature stage when it comes to controlling mana and fighting with swords. So he'll teach a special technique, and if their opponents are strong to the point where it doesn't seem like there's a chance of winning, they should hit their vital points so Boris kicks him. Everyone comments that Egg Smasher's eggs were broken and the victory is Boris's. Eamon asks if she saw it and just has to do the same as him, since they were rooting for her, while thinking he bet 2 golds on her. The man from before says his business was ruined because of these 2 brats, ordering them to call troublemaker Dexon, but his subordinate says Viscount Rumdum is there. However, his master says he can't cause problems, but Dexon had said he was taking the day off today. Meanwhile, in the arena, everyone is dumbfounded, wondering if Chloe was always this talented. The giant runs toward the little girl, but Chloe jumps over him next. Mario comments that even though she only learned swordsmanship, she was fighting very well barehanded, and Eamon says Marquis Field created swordsmanship with unarmed combat. If you do it with fists, it becomes a crushing punch, and if you do it with a sword, it becomes a lunging attack, and it seems he knows things very well. Mario questions if he learned swordsmanship with Sloth, but Amon says no, because even when he asked, she said she would never teach. But the protagonist congratulates the good work, saying that to celebrate the victory, it'll be on him today, and Mario questions if him too, but the protagonist says no because he earns more. That man from before says these damn brats will pay dearly if they come back there. Later, Eamon's wallet was empty, wondering how hungry they must have been to completely empty his wallet like that. But he knocks on the door saying he'll get some money for the competition from the director, until he hears a scream, opening the door and asking what happened. Anarel calls Professor Amon and talks about her King Mango, since there's only one left, and thinks it could be a thief, but she can give a reward if he catches him. Meanwhile, Amon was only thinking about what he could earn, so he asks the director to stay calm, jumping and saying he will do his best to catch this thief. So he tries a kick while Anarel asks him to wait, landing a kick to his face. Later, Bless, the vice director of this academy, introduces herself. Eamon says he thought he'd get a reward, but Bless questions that, and he says he didn't recognize her. Bless says she wouldn't imagine she'd experience so many different things the moment she came back, and she'll lose her job just for going on vacation. She's been doing her best to operate things while preventing this idiot from doing stupid things. Eamon questions if she's saying she's been operating this academy until now, but Bless asks how she could trust this idiot elf. Anarel says she wasn't, but Bless wants to know what this entry is in the ledger with a temporary income of 5,000 golds. The director says it was money from a snail race victory. Bless shouts that it's good to have temporary income, but wants to know what if it had gone wrong, and she should be aware of her position as director. If it's just that again, she must be sure to invest in the King Mango farm. Eamon questions why they should invest in the farm, and Bless says considering the leader's letter, it's an investment with a certain rate of return. The reduction of cafeteria staff is fatal, and she must pull up the employee documents. Eamon asks her to wait, since there are only 3 teachers and 2 students, so he wants to know why they should add more cafeteria staff. Bless calls the newbie next, saying that low-quality meals will only decrease the morale of the remaining staff, and they should increase quality. Amon thinks that now that he's looking at it. Everything is related to the cafeteria. Bless says their meat supplier is also horrible, and they need to find a new partner. Amon is surprised right after, saying he'd like her to participate as lead teacher in the competition held by Your Majesty starting tomorrow. Bless gets irritated and questions why she would do that. The protagonist thinks that if she stays there, his academy will end up becoming a giant cafeteria, and says if she shows up as representative, His Majesty will be happy. But he starts trying to convince her any way possible, even threatening. The Emperor calls all the children of the Empire, wanting to know if they're excited for this tournament, and Amon thinks he was known as the most democratic ruler. Sandro Argia Amonith, also known as Amonith the 18th. Boris calls the professor and Amon questions what's up. The boy looks down next, and the protagonist says it was all good, looking at the sky and wondering how much money he spent on this, and if this is how he uses his taxes. A meat skewer with seaweed is prepared. The children bring it to their mouths. Amon questions if it's tasty and thinks they're expensive as hell. Chloe asks to bite a little piece until she bumps into someone. Her skewer falls to the ground next. Amon tells her not to worry because there's the 3-second rule, and Chloe says it's all good, turning back angrily, and says he was a damn disrespectful person. Boris questions where Professor Mario and the Academy's vice director are, and Amon says he doesn't know since they were with them at the opening ceremony, but he asks to wait next. Thinking that many dark elves are obsessed with one thing, wanting to know if she was starving during her vacation because it was worse than he imagined. Amon gets irritated seeing those two and yells for them to stop eating. At another moment, the two call the professor, questioning if it isn't insubordination, and Amon says that now his students won't be able to have a decent meal, thanks to the two of them who spent all his money at once. And they should remember that every commander with a bad reputation among his soldiers loses his life at the hands of his own men. But murder would be a bit much, so he suggests beating them until they're almost lifeless, and Bless asks him to wait, and questions if he knew there's a private betting group inside this competition. Amon bets 6 silver each on Boris and Chloe's victory, that they'll win their first fight, and the organizer hands over the ticket. Thanking them for using his services, the protagonist thinks, not this again, but the two have beaten adults before, and this is a winning bet. The first category of the competition is sword skills. Calling the participants to come forward next, Amon thinks he trusts the kids, but they'll starve for the rest of the competition if they lose, plus walk back to the academy on foot. Both walk forward until Boris feels a pain, commenting that it hurts a lot. Result of Amon's special fencing training, with victory going to Chloe, and the competition beginning with that. While Boris was having a fierce fight against a student from a renowned academy, he's pressed just slightly. The audience thinks he's absurdly talented for a commoner. Boris thinks no because his shoulder is hurting more and more. Amon thinks that was the easiest 60 silvers he's ever made, and Boris's odds are 1 to 100 since he's a commoner, and that's way too good to be true. The boy advances right after, going with his characteristic aerial strike. Boris remembers his past when they believed in him, and his parents said he'd do well at the academy. The boy broke into a smile. He realized something after entering the academy. To be average among the nobles, he had to work 10 times harder. Amon approaches and asks if he's still training. Boris calls out to the professor, and he says that watching him also makes him feel motivated. Boris calls the professor and asks why he asked him to participate in the competition. Amon looks at him next, wanting to know why he was there training on his own late at night, and Boris thinks, of course, that he can win, striking with the sword, but a sharp pain hits his shoulder. Boris retreats quickly next. Amon wonders why he's doing this if he had the advantage, but the other student asks what happened and where that momentum went, or if that's the limit of a commoner, and Boris strikes back at his blow, telling him to shut up because he doesn't know anything, but his shoulder hurts right after. Boris can't move and thinks his shoulder locked up, while that noble advances toward him, and the boy gets a desperate expression. The noble calls him a commoner, moving his sword next, and striking his shoulder while telling him to go back home. Amon thinks he lost, so they announce the winner is student Exterlata. The protagonist complains about losing his silvers, but everyone comments that Commoner Boy is incredible because he defended well against the heir of the Lada family. He may be a commoner, but everyone was eager to see his future. Boris approaches and calls his professor, and Amon calls the brat, wanting to know what's with that face. Boris apologizes for losing in the first round, and Amon says it was fine and he did well, however. He wants to know why he didn't say his shoulder was hurting. Boris says if he'd told him, he couldn't have participated in the competition and wanted to win, but the protagonist calls Boris, wanting to know how the special classes were, and Boris replies they were hard but also fun, and moreover he gained confidence to do the impossible. unbelievable. Eamon says the results aren't the important part, but the process and many opportunities will come for him in the future. He can take the experience he gained and use it as a foundation to keep working hard, but he must promise to tell him if he's in pain right away from now on. Anyway, the narrator announces that the fencing division of this competition has finally reached the final stages. Many young people of the Empire have already shown their talent, and specifically participant Chloe, who arrived like a comet and achieved great results, and they were eager to see. The final match would be Chloe Aaron against Raymond, with Eamon thinking that student was just a commoner who doesn't belong to the academy, and his skills are sufficient. They announce the two participants have entered, and at this rate, Chloe's victory was guaranteed. Eamon wonders about that next. The boy walks in the arena, remembering his grandfather told him to hide his abilities as much as possible during the competition, and Raymond says he's serious. Wanting to know how exactly he could learn anything in a competition like this, Raymond was the hidden grandson of the greatest swordsman in the Empire, Rheinbelt, so Raymond says he'll be in their care. Chloe says that wasn't looking over there, so it's no fun, let's just get this over with. Raymond agrees because a competition of such a low level isn't fun at all, and he'll show just a bit of his abilities. So the battle begins with the narrator's whistle. Raymond advances toward her, making a strike that Chloe can only dodge. Raymond changes his sword's direction, attempting a downward cut. Eamon thinks that judging by the boy's movements, he's definitely not someone ordinary, and it's as if he's looking at a wild bear. The narrator announces that Raymond took the initiative with heavy yet agile movements, and Chloe thinks he's way too fast and needs to block, but wonders how she'd do that. Raymond strikes the girl's shoulder with the sword, thus earning a point and asking if it got fun, but Chloe says it hasn't even started, until the voices of people in the arena say she's terrible. But she wasn't that bad before, and watching her get hit without being able to counter isn't fun. Chloe starts getting desperate with so many voices in her head. She thought she'd overcome this, but she was afraid now. When she walked through school, everyone mocks her for being from fallen royalty. She didn't even want to do this. Chloe had asked her father why he was sending her to study on another continent because she wants to stay. But her father says to go, since if she wants success, she has no choice. Royalty without a right to the throne was the fate she had to accept. The girl pets a pig named Jason, wondering how she should live from now on. The pig just makes a noise and releases excrement. Even if she was abandoned to study abroad, losing her dignity as royalty was something she could never accept, but wonders why the other students didn't like that. And even after her country fell, their persistent bullying began. Since then, she's grown up afraid of people's eyes, with the narrator saying she'll be disqualified if she continues like this, and Eamon thinks it's dangerous, and if Chloe wins the fight, they'll secure at least 1 gold and 50 silvers. So he shouts the girl's name next, asking if she forgot what he taught and learned during special training about the attitude toward strangers. She was supposed to consider strangers as familiar people with funny faces. Raymond wonders if that guy is the professor, and he has a loud voice, until he's struck on the head with the sword. Bless says, thinking about it, that student is from the Aaron kingdom, and their pork was a delicacy. Mario comments it was renowned for pig farming, and the roads used to be completely blocked by them. The way they referred to them was that they were shitty pigs. Eamon thinks he told her to imagine them as something from her homeland, and that he turned her into a monster, with Chloe using her lethal roast pork slicing swordsmanship. Raymond plants himself on the ground next, advancing toward the girl, and so both have a sword duel. He thinks that's Aura Blade, but that's forbidden in this duel, so he wants to know how she gained a burst of strength like that out of nowhere. Chloe asks where he's looking, calling him a ridiculous little piggy with a macabre smile. Raymond is completely defeated by the swordsmanship. He thinks he realized something thanks to this, that he was just a frog trapped in a well, so the fight ends with victory going to Chloe of the Aaron Kingdom. Eamon celebrates that he liked seeing that, and it should be enough to cover expenses this time, but the competition stops next, with the girl collapsing on the ground. Later, everyone must stand because the Emperor will congratulate the winners with a speech. Sandro says these fights were satisfying to watch, but of course seeing such a magnificent performance from children who will be leaders made him satisfied. Now the winner of the swordsman tournament must go to the stage, with Raymond walking. Eamon thinks she should be there, and Chloe too, that he was living an easy life enjoying his success. According to the competition rules, the fight ends when he leaves the arena with both feet, and the winner was Raymond. But the Emperor tells them to wait a moment because he also wants to speak with the other one, who had an excellent performance, and asks Chloe to come to the podium. He offers his sincere gratitude to all of them for making this event shine, and as a reward will give these children 10 gold coins each. By the way, He calls Chloe and says she's from the Aran Kingdom and must have been through a lot. He met her father a few times and it was his fault, but it must have been very difficult seeing how she was justifying everything, and Aemon thinks he's a saint. The Emperor talks about the professor who shouted earlier being quite an interesting fellow. Then he calls the one who taught her to come to the podium. Aemon walks thinking he never expected something like this to happen to him. The path to success always begins with a first step, and he gives his sincere greetings to your majesty. The Emperor says he was a capable young man with an excellent student and will also reward him with 10 gold coins. But he seems familiar and wants to know his name, so the protagonist says it was Aemon Drake. The Emperor repeats his surname, wondering who the hell was calling him your majesty. No wonder his ugly face was full of greed, and he's a bastard from the Drake family. Aemon wonders if he has some kind of grudge against his family, and Sandor says his greed is evident enough, but he should take the bag of coins right away, pulling it away from him next while laughing. But he says it's just a joke, and Aemon says he got him and accepts with pleasure. Sandro pulls the bag away from him once more. Aemon thinks this was supposed to be the Amonith, who is a saint among all saints, and he'll just endure it since his family will get an even worse reputation. So they'll pretend he just made a mistake and land a solid hit. But the Empress questions what kind of obscenity this is, and how an emperor should show dignity befitting his position. Sandro says he let himself be carried away by emotions and showed a bad side. Victoria comments that he's from the Drake family, and it seems he's not aware of the conflict between the Amonith family and the Drake family. The protagonist wonders what she's talking about. The Empress says there's a reason why the emperor was acting this way, so he'll be excused for today. But in the end, he leaves without the gold coins. Back home, Reinbelt asks how everything went, and Raymond says he won. His grandfather asks if he won while hiding his abilities, as he said. The boy just looks to the side without answering. Reinbelt strokes his head, saying he doesn't hide it, and wants to know what he thinks because the world is a difficult place, and Raymond agrees. His grandfather says he was once called a talented swordsman, and earned the title of Blue Sword King, but he's sure there's someone out there stronger than him. What he's trying to say is that arrogance can become poison, but he wants to know who was the talented person who managed to make him show his true abilities. And Raymond answers it was Chloe Aaron from Amonith Academy. She had a professor, and Reinbelt says since his dear student had to show his ability, he must be excellent, opening a smile on his face next, and says that was interesting. Meanwhile, a crisis was unfolding at Amonith Academy with Anarel crying. Amun questions if she can repeat what she just said. The secretary says in response to the disrespect shown to the emperor, they were recommending that Aemon from the Drake family should be dismissed. And he doesn't know what crimes he committed against the emperor, but he should be grateful that his majesty is recommending his dismissal instead of something worse. Aemon thinks about the dismissal recommendation, and if he had known this would happen, he would have been satisfied just seeing the emperor in person, thinking he'd be able to leave this academy so easily without having to pay a fine. Questioning why he chose such a painful path when there was such an easy way out, and Anarel asks what exactly happened. Aemon says he's not sure, but it seems his family and the emperor have a history, so your majesty was angry with him, and the director says he did a lot. The protagonist secured funding for the academy, organized special training for the students, and put an end to the vice director's ambitions. Mon says he created so many precious memories there, but there's nothing they can do about it, and he thanks them for everything, and Anarel says they can't do anything, except ignore your majesty's recommendation, and her academy already received a foreclosure recommendation anyway. A recommendation is just a recommendation, and as you can see, they're doing very well. Even if they ignore their recommendations, nothing will happen. As the school's director, she finds this totally unacceptable and can't just sit watching an excellent professor like him leaving the school and do nothing. It was too early to give up now, and Amon says this is the perfect time to watch, and Bless appears asking, what's all this commotion there? Questioning about Professor Amon's dismissal recommendation, and the protagonist says that's right and wants to be dismissed, but she says he can't. Wanting to know how she can dismiss an excellent professor like him, even if it's your majesty's recommendation, and she can't do that. Amon thinks she was doing this on purpose because she knows he wants to be dismissed. Mario opens the door saying a talented professor cannot be dismissed. He'll request from Marquis Willens, the commander of the North, an audience with your majesty, and everyone starts talking about various things. Amon shouts that if they don't want to dismiss him, then they should give him some damn rest, and so he gave up his attempt to flee the academy, Amon's homeland, in the Drake Estates of the Arma Mountains. The protagonist thinks he finally returned. Anarel comments this is the first time she's come here, and so this is what the end of the continent looks like. Mario says it was a beautiful day to drink, and Amon thinks he was together with all these embarrassing people. The day before, Anarel says since it's been 3 months since he came there, he has 3 days off he can use. Aemon thinks it'll take 15 days just to get to the estate, and the academy doesn't accept accumulating more than a month of leave. It was time to negotiate, and Amon says his homeland is in the Arma Mountains, and Anarel says she'll let him take another day since it's quite far. Amon questions if he can take his days off in advance, but the director denies it, wanting to know if he was trying to bend the rules. But she says they can use teleportation magic the same way they went to the slug race, and Amon thanks her but wants to know why she was packing. The director says she'll have to bring him back, so she's going with him. She was excited because she'd never been to the Arma Mountains before, and now that the competitions are over, it'll be a great place for field study classes. She'll tell this news to the other professors and students, and Amon questions if she was thinking his house is a tourist spot. Anarel questions if he won't take his leave and then thinks he won't need it. Amon asks why they all need to go together and should let him go alone. But she suggests something else next, wanting to know how to balance his 4-day leave against using teleportation magic, but with everyone together. Amon grinds his teeth with even more anger. Anarel shouts, "This place is relaxing," and the protagonist thinks for him it's not. Then his father welcomes everyone. Kym Drake says he hopes they have a comfortable stay in his humble home. Anarel thanks him for his hospitality, and Kym says he doesn't need to thank him, while Mario offers drinks. Amon thinks his father shouldn't be fooled because what's inside a person is much more important. He has to get these scoundrels away from his father before they become too close. But he calls his father next, and Kym questions what's wrong. Since he was there, he has a question, commenting there's a strange reaction between the Amoniths and the Drakes, and Amon questions about it, so his father comments it was time for him to find out. The Drake family is an indirect lineage of descendants of the Amonith family. Amon questions why they only have a barony since the Emperor's relatives should have a greater title since even Archduke Orca, who was the Emperor's relative, has one. But his father tells him to read this and he'll understand. These are the records from the time of the first Emperor of the Empire, and it's been quite a while, but they also share blood from the first Emperor. That's why they've been copying all of this for all this time, but there are no records from his father's era, so this is the truth about your family. The protagonist opens the book. In year 1 of the unified imperial era, conversation between Gemery Area and Archduke Drake, the Emperor said he wanted to beat the crap out of that Drake idiot. However, in the 3rd year, he took a beating and was finished after fighting. In year 6, the Emperor said it was impossible to get the message through to Duke Drake. He lost his Archduke title and should have listened, so he becomes a Marquis, then Count, Viscount, until Crown Prince Sandor said that Bellion Drake stole his sausage and asked to demote him from Viscount to Baron. Amon closes the book thinking they actually call this a chronicle. This was just a children's fight escalating into a family feud, which led the two families to grow apart, and it was the stupidest reason. Kym says it's shameful how they ended up as a barony, and Amon says he was afraid they had committed treason and wants to know what the hell kind of situation this is, wanting to know if something happened with the Emperor, but Kym replies he never met him, and his grandfather had a fight with him, and the Great War ended. Even being hostile, maybe that relationship was the reason his people weren't recruited for war, and he's sure they must have forgotten about them since they live far away. Anyway, it was secret information that only the advisors closest to the Emperor and the Drake family know, and he shouldn't let the information leak. Amon questions why he's only telling him now, and his father says he was acting like he wouldn't do something about it if he knew, and he takes after his mother. Julia asks who this dark elf is, and Kym says she's back, but the two are left speechless right after. Julia says her son is home, and the protagonist says yes, but wants to know why he was with her. The mother says she found her digging up their potato fields, so she hit her and wants to know if she's a dark elf. The protagonist says she's the vice principal of his academy. Outside, everyone comments that the vice principal was dragged inside just now, wondering what kind of place this is. The men walk with monsters on their backs. Everyone wonders how they caught them. The man looks and sees the elf ear, wanting to know who it was, since he'd never seen her there before. Amon appears and they call out young master, and the protagonist says he heard a noise that sounded like a pig losing its life, so it wasn't a monster. Everyone wants to know who came back, and Amon says he just got back, commenting that the hunt wasn't good, and maybe the monsters aren't breeding due to excessive hunting. Anyway, they should say hi since they're the directors, teachers, and students of the academy where he works. The men say he's become a wonderful teacher, and should keep working hard. Amon thinks he'll complete his 3-year contract and get out of there, then says they should take a bath, turning around and saying he was happy to see them after all this time, but this place is too noisy and it's late, so they should go inside, getting surprised right after, with everyone sitting on the floor thinking this is a family of lunatics, and the guy questions what's wrong with them. Later, Anarel questions what she's eating now. Amon replies, it's meat. The woman questions how he can eat monster meat, and the protagonist says it may not look like it, but it's pretty tasty. Anarel says she'll only eat potatoes. No matter how long she lives with humans, she doesn't like meat, and the protagonist says he forgot she's an elf. Everyone everyone keeps celebrating life anyway. In the end, Eamon took a punch, and everything was peaceful for the first time in a long time, until a massive explosion happens. Mario questions what that noise was, and Sloth says it was an alarm. Eamon says it's just a pest and they can go take care of it, while Boris questions why he needs an axe to do that. The protagonist says everyone had their weapons, and they'll go there real quick to finish this so they can keep eating. A horde of orcs heads toward the humans. Eamon moves his axe, questioning how they dare interrupt his moment of peace, because they're all done for. Making a cut and talking about the tender meat of his leg, the orc goes in his direction. But the protagonist finishes him with a blow to the neck. Then they keep walking through the monsters. Eamon keeps making cuts non-stop to defeat them all, doing this even with the flying ones. Their wings fall to the ground right after. Mario says he feels like his common sense is crumbling, and Sloth agrees. It was the first time seeing such a savage fight, and Eamon thinks he was feeling tired after moving like this for the first time in a good while. He didn't even learn any real combat techniques, and still manages to fight so well just with his physical abilities and instincts. And as he thought, it was good not to have taught him any sword techniques. Eamon sighs right after, saying it's been a good while since he fought some monsters, so it was quite a workout. Everyone congratulates the young master, and Eamon says his body is all stiff because he was pretty clumsy. This must be the result of having become so complacent while working as a teacher. Mario congratulates the good work, and Amon says it wasn't anything important and they should rest. The professor questions if that was the entire monster wave coming, and the protagonist confirms, but there seems to be one more monster coming that way. It would be a drake, but Mario says that's the family's surname. Eamon yells that he was calling his family monsters. The professor questions if it was the dragon species, and the protagonist says not to say that even as a joke because he'd get an earful. Anyway, those monsters seem to be running from something, and he wants to know what he thinks can handle ogres and draconian subspecies. According to literary records, drakes are characterized by a huge body that resembles castle walls and scales as hard as steel armor. Besides, the elder drake would turn the potato fields into lifeless land if a bastard like that came. Mario says it was a rare monster that only appears in literary records, and Amon says that's true, and in the first place. They rarely appear, but they were in the village eating the potatoes. The vice principal screams in anger at this. Chaim questions how he can be so careless in front of a major elder drake disaster. Mario questions if he believes in him, a sixth circle mage. There'll be nothing but a handful of ashes after facing his fire magic, throwing the magic at the drake, but the monster just deflects it. Mario dodges, and Amon comments that he was calling himself a handful of ashes. Sloth is surprised and says this thing is a creature that her father has defeated one before, so she'll also be able to do it. But her sword breaks, and Amon says if swords worked against them, he would have cut with his axe a long time ago. And there's not much choice, since now that things have come to this point, they should gather their forces and exterminate those bastards, holding the body of one of them, and so carrying the elder drake away from there. But they comment that this bastard is still trying to eat the potatoes at this hour, until a voice says it's been a while since he came, but wants to know what all this commotion is. Eamon calls out elder, and the old man says that was expected of him. Gisela says these bastards are causing trouble, and the protagonist confirms, since if he has any strength left over, he can help pull. Then the elder hits the drake on the head, wanting to know what kind of bad behavior this is, and uses the command for him to go back now, so the elder drake starts to flee. Eamon thanks him, and that elder asks if everything was okay at work since he was a little one a while ago, but now he's grown up and is teaching students. But the protagonist introduces his co-workers who are usually like this anyway, and those two right there are the principal and vice principal. The elder comments on the two elves having an important position at the academy, and says he's Casella and asks them to take care of Amon. Anarel panics right after, screaming that he was a dragon and falls to the floor. At home, Anarel questions why there's a black dragon living in a human village. Eamon tells her he's just a neighborhood elder who's been wandering around since he was young, and is also close to his father. And the elder Casella said he's already getting old and sick, so he can't go out much anymore. He doesn't know any other dragons either, so he comes to visit them. He's pretty lonely, and Anarel says he was talking about a dragon like a dog that got kicked out of its pack. Eamon says that anyway, since the property is so chaotic, she should head back to the academy soon because he'll stay to clean up the mess. But he'd like her to stay, because he heard that elves possess a unique magic that helps with the abundant growth of crops. The owner of the King Mango Farm wrote about it in a letter, and said she went there on her day off to cast a spell, and that he'd keep it a secret. But if she stays there, fear will drive her crazy, and her hands were shaking non-stop. Eamon says that although she brought the whole academy on a whim, she was trying to leave when things got tough. The director says she can just leave since she has teleportation magic, but the protagonist pretends the elder had arrived and scares her. Then he says he was just kidding, because Casella said he was going to take a walk around the village, but Casella shows up right after that, wanting to know when he'll come back to the property again, and Amon answers he doesn't know since he needs a few more months to gather some days off. Casella says that's perfect because by then he'll have prepared a gift for him, but it was something even more valuable than gold. Later the next day, they drive their hoes into the ground. The sudden monster incident turned the field trip into a farming excursion, planting potatoes all day long. Boris and Anarel use magic to make the potatoes grow. Finally, they succeed and everyone celebrates. Later in the forest, Eamon walks, thinking he'll have to go back to work tomorrow. This break didn't feel like a break at all. Actually, he just wanted to visit the property to ask his father for advice before quitting his teaching job at the academy. But the property isn't in good condition. While he was away, monster attacks decreased significantly, and his income proportionally as well. Even with income under his brother's name, it's nowhere near enough to recover from this disaster, and at this rate they can't even pay the fine, wondering if he could be a harbinger of disaster. Otherwise, why did the monsters attack as soon as he arrived there? And there's no way an Elder Drake, which is practically mythical, would just show up like that, wondering if his first job was also a mess because of him, but he denies it right after, since it has nothing to do with him. It was that idiot elf's fault, and he thinks he needs to succeed soon, until he hears a noise in the distance. He approaches thinking it could be another monster, but it was coming from that direction. He's surprised right after, seeing Professor Sloth with her sword, and he wonders if that's the first swordsmanship of the Field family. But he remembers she didn't help with the farm work earlier and had been swinging that sword this whole time, and he's going to teach her a lesson. However, he notices the state she was in, wondering if she swung that sword until her hands bled. The girl starts to compose herself right after, going back to practicing swordsmanship, and Amon wonders why she's so desperate, and if that's why she's always napping during the day, since she's been training her swordsmanship in secret this whole time. But he turns away right after, thinking he may have several questions, but for now he'll pretend he didn't see anything. A few days later at Amanith Academy, a man asks if she's the director. Anarel confirms and asks what brings him there. Reinbelt asks where Professor Eamon Drake is. In his office, the protagonist thinks it's been a few months since he became a teacher at this academy. He always thought only about how to escape this shitty reality, but from now on it's for real, and he'll do his best to teach the students diligently. With their abilities, it's just obvious they'll become something great one day, and when that happens, he'll benefit from it. Success was just following your connections, and he'll get there. Until Anarel knocks on the door calling him, and the protagonist yells for her to knock before entering. The woman apologizes, but a visitor came there to see him. Eamon goes to the room right after, recognizing who that man was, the shameless little thief who stole Chloe's victory. Reinbelt introduces himself and says it's a pleasure to meet him, and Eamon recognizes he's one of the 4 great sword masters of the Empire, the Celestial Sword King Reinbelt. The protagonist shakes his hand and introduces himself as the second son of Baron Drake. He thinks he doesn't know why someone with his status came there to see him, but this is the perfect chance to make a good impression on one of the big shots and get out of this academy. The Celestial Sword King, Reinbelt, is one of the 4 great masters, an important pillar of the Empire, who says the way the student named Chloe defeated his grandson was quite incredible, and he wanted to see who her teacher is with his own eyes, and Amon thinks he still considers him important. It had to be that way after all. For the sake of his students, he ran after them, provoked them, and realizes he didn't do anything special. Reinbelt says he came to the right person, and seeing the way he taught his students, he must be a swordsman. Questioning about it, but Amon says he didn't teach them swordsmanship, but simply guided them on the path of hard work, and he wonders what that look on his face was, with Reinbelt arguing with Raymond about it. He analyzes for a few seconds and asks if he can call Chloe's swordsmanship instructor. Sloth introduces herself and says it's a pleasure to meet the Celestial Sword King. Reinbelt thinks that in that case she must be very good at teaching, looking at her coldly, since at most she's a sword expert, but he heard that the Field family doesn't let their members venture out before they become masters. Still, her mana resembles that Marquis Field he met in the past quite a bit, and he suggests testing her a little, saying she can't refuse a duel. The girl confirms and says she'll show him the training field then. Eamon remains seated, wondering what other way could he expect his life to go. He failed to form a connection he could exploit. At the training field later, Sloth crouches with the sword still in hand. Reinbelt asks if that's all she had to show, but the girl says not yet, so the swordsman reflects that as he imagined, she's a sword expert and nothing more or less. It makes sense since the Field family doesn't teach outsiders their secret techniques, and there's no way she taught anything special to Chloe. Reinbelt says he'll show one more move with this branch before they end the duel, moving at an insane speed, and thus making several swordsmanship movements with the branch in hand. In the end, he points it toward her, stopping his sequence of strikes right after, and comments that she should keep working hard from now on. Sloth just thanks him for it, falling to the ground on her knees right after. Reinbelt asks if this is the girl who gave Raymond trouble, and Eamon introduces Chloe to him. The old man thinks that being someone from the Highland Kingdom of Erin, she should have more endurance and vigor than normal, so it wasn't the training, but the talent. So he tells the director it was a pleasure meeting her, and Amon agrees, but thanks him for showing his incredible swordsmanship skill. Until Reinbelt notices something, asking what did he say about incredible swordsmanship, and he thinks that for a normal person, that should just be some movements of swinging a tree branch, and Amon tells him he changed the trajectory of the attacks. Still, his center of gravity didn't shake at all, and he even finished with a thrust, so that's incredible. Reinbelt asks him to duel. The protagonist says he barely knows how to hold a sword, and it's not that simple. Thinking that if he had the courage to face a swordmaster, he would have left this hole of a place a long time ago, so he apologizes for disappointing him. Reinbelt starts provoking him, insulting him and Professor Sloth, or even the director's judgment, but Eamon just agrees, warning that he's not the type of person who'll fall for those provocations, and it's better to give up. Reinbelt asks if he was thinking about that, and is he sure his students aren't anything special? But the protagonist advances with a movement when he says that. Chloe and Boris celebrate as Professor Eamon defends them, while the protagonist thinks he lets most things slide, but you don't mess with his livelihood. He moves the stick at maximum speed next, striking the back of Reinbelt's head. Then he puts his hands on his hips, commenting that he can't believe the Heavenly Sword King passed out after being hit by a branch, and that scoundrel was a fraud. While Raymond tries to wake up his grandfather, Eamon grabs him and says they can't let him lose his life even if he is a fraud, and he thinks he might even get a reward for capturing someone who was impersonating the Heavenly Sword King. From afar, Sloth rises slightly, watching the protagonist from a distance with a serious expression. In the teacher's lounge, Anaril questions what the hell he means by reward, since she's met him before. Reinbelt gets up next and the director questions if he just woke up, and she's really sorry and will make sure Eamon receives punishment for his bad behavior, but the man says it wasn't anyone's fault. At an afternoon tea, he explains that he insisted on testing his abilities personally, and that's what happened. Amon may not have experience with swordsmanship, but he possesses great and pure physical strength. But he moves some of his mana, manifesting a gigantic sphere in the air. Eamon recognizes it as the Aura Blade, a technique exclusive to Grand Swordmasters. Reinbelt says what he possesses is pure physical strength, and against Empire Knights who use mana and swordsmanship they achieved through training, he'll be at a disadvantage. So he suggests he learn swordsmanship. Eamon thinks the title of Disciple of the Heavenly Sword King could make money and be served on a silver platter. So he says he was looking forward to the master's teachings, and the Sword King warns he's going to recite the Oath of Loyalty, saying that as a disciple of the Sword King, he must devote himself to the path of the sword, and swear to abandon his material desires and worldly yearnings to focus only on sword training. But Eamon stops repeating next, asking what he means by that. Reinbelt questions if he didn't hear about swearing to abandon his material desires and focus only on sword training. The protagonist questions if he can have some time to think about it, thinking that everything was so chaotic that until now, he hadn't even noticed there was something strange. Wanting to know why one of the 4 great sword kings seemed so dirty. So he questions what his title is out of curiosity. Reinbelt says it was just a little show since the Emperor offered a marquee title, but he refused immediately, and Amon gets worked up over that, wanting to know what about his fortune, but the Sword King says a small piece of land to swing his sword and a hut to rest is enough. And by the way, if he's his disciple, he shouldn't even dare to keep such desires or he'll take his life with one strike. Eamon thinks that now that he was stopping to think about it. Raymond had been eating non-stop since he arrived, and he questions if Anaril has more of those crunchy things. So he thinks this old man doesn't even have money to feed his grandson. Besides, he was also dressed like a commoner at the competition, even though he's the disciple of the Grand Swordmaster. Nothing good will come from getting involved with them, so he excuses himself, saying he needs to go to the bathroom while fleeing far away. While he was fleeing, something slides from his pocket. His wallet falls to the ground. At the time to pay the bar tab that totaled 20 coppers. Eamon wonders where it was, and thinks his wallet disappeared, so he suggests putting it on the tab. Back on the academy path, he wants to know where the hell he dropped it. Reinbelt hands it to him, and the protagonist turns around happy, but recognizes him next and questions why he was there in those clothes, and Reinbelt responds that he started working as an academy guard. In his room, the protagonist thinks about that old man. He had said the vacancy for main gate guard schoolyard was open, so he decided to work there for now. Eamon says he has no ties to the academic world and should go back to the mountains, but Reinbelt comments he doesn't mind, but Ray shouldn't go back. He's also a swordmaster now, and there's no need to keep watch all the time. Besides, it was already time to receive a proper education, so that means he's going to enroll there, but the tuition fee is quite expensive, so he decided to work to pay for it. He may not know anything about swordsmanship, but he seems to have a strong belief in education, so he trusts he'll be able to teach Ray well, and he'll be counting on Mr. Eamon. The protagonist wonders who could imagine that teaching Chloe so well could haunt him this way, and decides to get up to drink some water and think about how to get through this, since the history class starts next week. But a knock on the door catches his attention and he opens it, questioning who it was. Bless appears with a somber expression asking for potatoes. Eamon questions why she was there at this hour, and the vice director says the smell of potatoes was strong there, and if he denies having potatoes, she'll invade right now. His mother had given a bag of potatoes for the protagonist to bring when he returned from home, and for Amon, this was his sanctuary in the middle of his exhausting life away from home. He can't believe he has to share this sanctuary with the person he likes least there. Until Mario approaches and Eamon says they were cooking potatoes for a snack and he should come. Bless thinks it was one more mouth to feed. Until the director, Boris, and Chloe appear, and Annarelle says she saw students wandering around at night and was going to scold them, but they said they saw fire in the field. So it turned out it was a potato party, and Bless thinks the number of mouths to feed tripled in no time. Sloth appears, questioning if there's also some for her, and Eamon says there aren't many left. The teacher says it was all right, and she doesn't even eat much anyway, but she had just returned from her secret nighttime sword training. Reinbelt and Raymond approach too, wanting to know where that delicious smell was coming from. Bless gets up and shouts for Amon to get all the potatoes right now, or better yet, everything he has there, and the protagonist says he was finding it strange she was quiet and now decided to show up. So he grabs that crazy elf's hair. In the end, he ended up bringing all the potatoes for everyone to eat. Anyway, they just finished cooking and everyone's going to eat. Reinbelt blows a little on the potato as it approaches Raymond's mouth, wondering what this is and what these potatoes are. Bless cries with happiness, and Eamon says they're his region's specialty and he's quite proud of them. Reinbelt says now he understands why he's strong. It was just normal after eating food so dense in mana like this every day, and his body adapted to the mana, and Amon thinks that's true, but it's not special. These potatoes are grown from seeds they buy in a nearby town, and maybe his territory's lands are really good. But whatever, he's just going to focus on the potato. Sloth keeps staring at the protagonist continuously. Eamon turns to the side, confused, and questions what this look of disgust from her is, but the teacher tells Eamon to marry her. The protagonist spits his food out, hitting Bless's face as he questions what she said. Sloth repeats for him to marry her, maintaining a serious face without giving any laugh. The protagonist wonders what kind of crazy plan she's plotting. She says she asked him to marry. Everyone is shocked and Chloe crushes a potato, while Reinbelt looks at the couple lovingly. Mario bursts out laughing, talking about them getting married, and Annarelle questions how he can laugh so loud like that. Sloth was too good for him, and actually, he thought he was the only one who thought that, but Amon grabs a bottle to hit them both. In a field with wilted flowers later, Amon walks beside her. Sloth questions how much he knows about the Marquis Field family. The protagonist says in their family the sword art is incredible, and all direct heirs are sword masters, and that's all he knows. But Sloth says there's something else. Her family cares about their reputation, so they don't let anyone leave before they become sword masters. Eamon thinks that based on the sword art she showed, at most she's a sword specialist. If they don't let anyone below leave, he wants to know how she was there, and Sloth says he must be thinking something like that. But she tells him that actually her family, they always treated her badly, and her whole life, they never cared about her. Eamon thinks he's never seen her make that face before. Sloth questions why he was looking at her like that, and the protagonist says she talks about it like it's nothing. The girl sighs, saying it was fine and she was used to it. No matter how hard she tries, she can't become a sword master, and that's probably why they treated her that way, so the patriarch sent her there. She understood he wanted to act like she didn't exist, and even so, she tried to resist, saying she couldn't disobey the rules, but he said she didn't need to worry about things like that, and after they expelled her, they didn't even look for her. After all, they don't need someone as weak as her, so they probably wanted her to survive on her own. However, while she was eating that potato, she had an epiphany, and thought that if she had more of it, she might be able to show her true potential. Considering her situation, she bets they'd be ignoring her even if she married him, and Eamon says that even though the situation is different, he knows what it's like to feel that way. Only the eldest son can inherit the noble title, and being the second son, he won't get anything, and his family might even care, but at the end of the day, he's just like her. So he wants to know if that's why she asked to marry him, so she could eat the potatoes and get strong to get revenge on the Marquis, and the girl confirms. A marriage of convenience, like all marriages between nobles, and Amon questions what he gets out of it. Sloth says he gets a woman as beautiful as her as a wife, and Eamon says he values character more, but she keeps talking, saying they'll say she ate the potatoes, got strong, and returned to her family, she might end up winning the succession battle, and she questions if he thinks he can handle all the work of being the leader of his family. But he shouldn't worry because she'll take care of part of it, but the rest will be on him, and Amon questions about the finances. She says of course because she's terrible at managing money, and by becoming a member of his family, he can learn swordsmanship, and so Eamon thinks it was like killing 3 rabbits with 1 stone, holding her hands next, and calling her wife because they're going to tell his father-in-law about their marriage tomorrow. The next morning, everything begins. Eamon walks thinking the sun of his life is finally rising, and goodbye to poverty. But anyway, he turns to the side, thinking that Sloth was going to stop by the hairdresser before they left, and she used to sleep in a sack, so he wants to know what would make someone like her want to come. So he starts trying to look through the window. The hairdresser questions what's the problem with the guy outside, since she even put up the closed sign, and Sloth questions if he's wearing a black suit like he's going to a funeral, and he was with her in that case. The woman assumes he's her servant then, and Amon comments that it was taking too long and maybe she lost her life, waiting 3 hours, until the door opens and the hairdresser questions if there's a problem, and Amon responds wanting to know if she saw a blonde woman with bird's nest hair. Sloth appears asking who has bird's nest hair, and thinks it was almost done, so he should wait a little longer. The protagonist questions who she was, but he recognizes Sloth next, and the girl asks if he didn't recognize her. Thinking it makes a lot of sense, she doesn't usually take care of her appearance, but when she does, there's a huge difference. Eamon thinks they're in the same boat, and he should at least try to get along with her. So he says that thinking about it, she only did her hair and put on makeup, so it's not surprising, since she's naturally beautiful. The hairdresser asks the servant to excuse them a bit because she hasn't finished her work yet, but Sloth tells her he's actually her fiancé, and the woman apologizes. Eamon gets irritated hearing that. Sloth's smile, in his view, was mockery, so he thinks that just because she looks pretty doesn't mean her personality has improved. In the city of Lingsley, Sloth tells him this city was under her father's rule, Batista Lingsley Field, and to think that before being expelled from the family, she never had the chance to know this place, and Amon thinks he can't believe she governs something so big, and says everything's fine, because in the future, she'll be nothing more than a toy in his hands. Sloth questions if he's only there for money, and the protagonist confirms. At Marquis Field's house, Sloth says that in front of her father, he should stay very quiet. The protagonist questions why, and she tells him he doesn't listen to anyone. No matter how busy the family is, he keeps holding meetings frequently, and all 13 swords of his family need to be present. They're the 13 best swordsmen of his family, and the patriarch is the first, plus his other older brothers. The protagonist thinks about 12 older brothers and hadn't understood what she meant, until he had all 13 pairs of eyes staring at him, being completely at a loss for what to do in this situation. He tries to keep a smile on his face, thinking they're the 13 swords of the Field family, and that must be his father-in-law, one of the great sword masters. Sloth questions how her father was doing, because she came there to talk about an important matter. While she was working as a teacher at Amonte Academy, she met someone who wanted to build a future, so she wants to share this news. And she'll introduce the son of Baron Drake, with whom she built a good relationship, and Eamon introduces himself. Sloth says that even though she hasn't received approval yet, she'd like to ask for his blessing, but the entire room falls silent, staring at the two of them. Sloth thinks they don't care about what she was saying, and so the words of the weak don't even deserve to be heard, wondering if she's that unwanted in this family. So she grits her teeth next, turning to leave the room. Eamon wonders why she was doing this, and if she leaves, she'll leave him alone. Batista puts his cigar in the ashtray and questions if he's Eamon from the Drake barony, and understands, ordering Lanslow to go toward him, so the youngest tries an attack. The protagonist asks why he's doing this suddenly. Lanslow says he'll fulfill his wish for the Drake barony. Eamon wonders what he should do since he came there to get approval for his marriage, so hitting him could be an act of self-defense. Everyone comments that he knocked out Lanslow with just one blow, but he's the weakest among them. Anyway, now it was Canslow's turn, but he's also taken down in one hit. Benslow, the 11th sword, would fight, but he's thrown far away. A guy says they should use swords, but Batista responds no, because they can't show their noble art of the sword to someone like him. Then a lollipop falls to the ground next. Amon says of course he's faster, but Batista calls Amon, and the protagonist suddenly feels murderous intent. The old man asks how he dares knock down 4 of the Field family's elite knights with a single blow, and he should be prepared to lose his life. If he has a last word, he'll listen, and Amon thinks he's huge, but he questions why he was doing this to him, and it's a question. Batista questions if he really doesn't know what he did wrong, and the protagonist asks him to tell. So the Marquis clenches his fist, asking how he dares deceive his beautiful and beloved daughter with his nefarious schemes and still claim he knows nothing. Aemon raises his head and questions about that. All the others say the same thing, saying that every time they see their sister, they freeze because she's adorable. Aemon thinks these people might be. They were silent earlier only because they froze in Sloth's presence, commenting that she was even more beautiful than before. Sloth opens the door upright. The protagonist asks where she was. The girl calls her father and her brothers, saying she heard the things they said from outside, so she didn't know what they really felt about her. The Marquis goes toward his daughter, then hugs her next, apologizing for creating this misunderstanding, and Sloth says everything was fine, and from now on she'll do her best. But her father says she doesn't need to try so hard, since if she's healthy, that's enough. Aemon watches this from afar, crying, and decides to just raise his head to look cooler. The ambitious marriage proposal was forgotten after the family shared their feelings, and he had to return to his daily routine. On the way, Aemon asks why she came back to the academy since she could have just stayed at the estate now that there's no more misunderstanding, but she says no. Her parents and siblings want her to walk the path of the sword and let her go because they want her to live freely, but still, she wants to keep walking her own path. And by the way, when she left, her younger brother gave her a letter telling her to come home more often. However, she wants to know why the protagonist seems so down, and Aemon says his path to success was completely annihilated. They say once a dragon shakes your heart, you'll feel awful seeing your chance at success ripped away, but Sloth smacks him on the head. In the director's office, she analyzes a letter, wondering if she should tell Professor Amon about this. The protagonist tells her they visited the Field Marquis, and it turned out everything was a misunderstanding, which is why it's important to communicate. But he wants to know what happened and why she was so sad. Anarel tells him, and this startles the protagonist, who questions about the King Mango farm going bankrupt, and it was because of the same Earth dance. Aemon questions how he's going to compensate them, and the director says it's all fine as long as there's no proof linking that phenomenon to the traditional elven dance. And even with his 400 gold remaining, he can find another investment, and Aemon says that's nothing compared to what they had when he joined, and he shouldn't even start with the snail racing talk, but the director says they only happen once every 10 years. Omen says he wants to know what it is, and the director tells him about unicorn racing. The protagonist strikes her head saying she never changes. The director suggests they invest in this new substance that was recently discovered, and Aemon questions this, grabbing the magazine, saying as if digging something out of the ground is a big deal, wanting to know if he'll be associated with all businesses when its value is assessed in the future, and it's because they know it's nonsense, and the owner even gave it a bizarre name. There's no decent investment in this so-called oil, and he might as well think of another plan instead of trying to increase his earnings, and they'll focus on the main problem. The Academy was an educational institute and encourages caring for the young blood of the Empire, so every year they should give generous support to the Academy. Anarel says that since they recommended closing the Academy, they won't get any of that, and Aemon says that's why he needs help. He heard she's an old friend of His Majesty, so there's a way out. Bribe the Emperor to keep the Academy open. Anarel questions if he thinks everyone is like her, and Amon says she must know what the Emperor likes and dislikes, while Raymond watches this from afar, wondering if his academy is going to fail. In the castle room, Sandro recognizes the famous dragon Bananas, and questions why give such a valuable gift, and Anarel says they're friends, but Sandro says that by her face, it seems she wants something different, like for example, negotiating the cancellation of the Academy's suspension of operations recommendation. Actually, he was thinking about their relationship and wanted to avoid the suspension, but considering past incidents, he couldn't decide this alone, but he notices something next, commenting that he's seen the children somewhere before and wants to know if they were the ones who participated in the last competition and were from Amonith Academy, but then he'll accept this. Considering the incredible feats of these students, he'll speak with the Prime Minister about the suspension recommendation. Anarel thanks him, and he says you're welcome, but he smells something next, coming out through the floor, crawling that thing, and he thinks about this next. Outside, Aemon wonders how things are going. That elf may not have much of a silver tongue, but she should manage to remove the suspension recommendation if she keeps insisting, and he may be a bit dramatic when he sees a drake, but he's wise. Then the king opens the door, saying he found him. That's why he could smell the disgusting stench of the drakes, and he was the big shot of it all. It was he who deceived and pressured Princess Anarel to cancel the suspension recommendation, and Aemon says he just did his job as an academy professor. He should leave his feelings out of business. And he asks to leave feelings out of business because the Drake family's ignorance and this matter have nothing to do with each other. They showed in the competition that they have the ability to raise children who might be of interest to him, but the Academy's current situation is deplorable. The children have to go hungry because of the Academy's bankruptcy, and the lack of funds is killing the Academy's programming, and they don't have the basics for classes. Before being a member of the Drake family, he's an educator, and the fact that the Academy's poverty is the reason students go hungry and have no access to education enrages him. Calling Your Majesty, he begs from the bottom of his heart to be generous and withdraw the Academy's suspension recommendation. Eamon thinks it was a success since he cried, and used the belief of a teacher's desperation for his students, since his opponent is an emperor who values education. He gave quite a speech about education and about the students, and he must be moved. But the emperor says he doesn't care, and the Drakes talk too much. The protagonist tells him to take it easy because he keeps being a pain over some things he doesn't even know about from the past. From afar, Victoria questions what Kai thinks. He says he believes in the young Drake's victory, being the prince of the Amanith Empire, Caius. Victoria clenches her fist, and Kai says he was talking about withdrawing the Academy's suspension of operations. He looks down next, remembering what he said about being an educator before being a member of the Drake family. It would be better to withdraw the recommendation and see what happens. Even though regrettable things happened there in the past, they should be generous. Victoria says the Drake family must have bothered him a lot for someone as kind as him to act that way, and she only met Belial Drake twice, but he seems quite decent compared to Belial. Kai says there will be no more disputes between the two families starting from his generation. Victoria opens a smile on her face, saying that if that's what he wants, then she'll end this wild dogfight. Even though the bribe was an offensive move, they couldn't withdraw the recommendation because the Emperor got beaten up, and the Empress asked him to come back. Eamon walks wondering when everything went wrong, and warns they're going to class. But he's surprised right after, asking what doll that is with Raymond. But the boy replies it's not a doll, and the protagonist questions what he means. Raymond caresses the doll's head, saying that this is actually him. The protagonist is completely startled by this sentence. Outside, Reinbelt was sweeping the floor. The protagonist calls the old man next. Reinbelt questions if he's finally going to become his disciple, and the protagonist says his grandson went crazy. The man questions if that's how young people today call others to a duel, and Eamon says no, because he's hugging a doll and saying it's him. Reinbelt says so it was because of that, and Raymond has a serious case of Prince syndrome. Eamon questions why he's not carrying a mirror around, and Reinbelt tells him that in the beginning it was a mirror, but one day he made a doll that was a perfect replica of himself, and then started carrying it around. He even made a new one when he grew up and tried to take it from him politely, but he threw a tantrum until he couldn't anymore. Eamon says he wasn't carrying one during the competition and told him to hide his abilities and identity at the time to try to fix his illness. Reinbelt says he actually enrolled him there because he has a little hope, touching his hand on his shoulder next, and saying that the hope is him, and Amon questions why so suddenly. Reinbelt explains that he defeated him with one blow, being a swordmaster, and he's capable of training an ordinary student like Chloe to compete equally against Ray, and he thinks a great teacher like him can put him on the right path. Eamon thinks he feels unnecessary pressure was placed on his shoulders, and he thinks a great teacher like him can put Ray on the right path, and he can't even fix the Academy's finances. But Raymond calls Mr. Eamon. The protagonist says he can't go around shoving a doll in other people's faces, and the boy apologizes for scaring him, and questions if the Academy is going through difficulties, and he already knew about this. Eamon says the adults will handle it, and they just need to focus on their studies, but he says he has an idea. They're going to open an exhibition for his doll. The protagonist questions this, and Raymond says it'll be packed with people wanting to see his doll. There are many empty rooms so they can borrow one and invite people and sell copies of the doll. After hearing Ray's grand plan, Eamon was certain. Later, a duck hunts a fish. After that fateful day at the plaza, Raymond started showing up at weird hours and pressuring Eamon for an answer. He hadn't even considered anything but had no choice but to accept. Raymond says he can do it without any money and just needs the room, and since he said that, they make the posters. Eamon comments that this brat even made flyers and is taking this pretty seriously. Anyway, half the Academy's rooms are empty and it doesn't matter what he does. So let's take a look at what he prepared. Screaming in fear right after. Hundreds of thousands of Raymond's dolls were scattered everywhere. Eamon questions what this is, and Raymond calls him. The protagonist runs off screaming that it was a ghost. Raymond says he was rude for calling him a ghost. In the city of Amur, the flyers fly. Some nobles toast, asking if he's heard. It seems Amanith Academy is going to do an exhibition, and they can't wait to see what pieces they'll exhibit. Reinbelt the next day is surprised, wanting to know what was happening there, with people at the gate wanting to know where the exhibition was. Eamon questions who all these people are, and Reinbelt calls his name, saying he was just going to look for for him because this was at the guard post and wants to know if he knows anything. Eamon explains the whole situation and asks what to do with all these people since the two of them can't control everyone. Reinbelt questions where are the other teachers, and Amon says don't even mention it. All the teachers went out to enjoy life, the vice principal doesn't support anything he does, and the principal is irritated with him. But he wants to know where Raymond was, and Reinbelt says he has been sick since last night from working too much. They'll have to deal with them alone then, and as soon as they see the exhibition, they'll never want to come back, running away in fear right after. They pray in Blayton's name, asking to protect him. A noble says they were uncultured people, and no matter how ugly the work is, there's always meaning behind it, but runs off as soon as he saw it, saying it's a hellscape. They question what kind of art it must be. Because of the visitors' reactions, rumors spread everywhere between commoners and nobility, no matter the rank, and the number of visitors kept growing. Eamon asks them to stay in line and not push others, thinking it's no use and he'll have to use his secret weapon, asking for help please with his head down, but with his entire body suspended in the air. He asks for the great principal, great vice principal, and great superiors to lend their strength to control the crowd please, but everyone stares at him with disgust. However, they'll help him, since if they don't stay in the village they'll have to pay a 10 gold fine. And finally, it's a bit better. Mario says he did all this in just a few days, and another man agrees. But the professor says he doesn't understand art. However, he's sure someone will see its true value. Later at Amonith Academy, with the day passing, a man analyzes that people are starting to leave. Amon asks if they should close the exhibition now, and Mario confirms. The man thinks about these dolls. All together like this, they're scary. But if you look at them one by one, they're actually pretty, and this work seems like a reflection of society, trapped in fake smiles and charm. Eamon warns he's going to close, and the man questions how much this doll costs. The protagonist says it was 1 silver, and the price is kind of high, but part of the money raised will help students in need and their academy. Outside at dusk, Mario questions how much the exhibition made today, and the protagonist answers nothing. An entry fee or some sale would have raised some money, but entry was free and nobody bought absolutely anything. Anarel says Raymond must have been so upset about this, with the boy saying these idiots don't understand his sophisticated art. Eamon agrees since they're people with very low intellect, and Raymond agrees since he ran away when he saw his work. It was his chance to spread his beauty to the world, and now he'll have to do another exhibition using 2 buildings this time. Eamon thinks that these last few days. Raymond made a bunch of dolls and still didn't sleep even once during his classes. Besides, the quality of each doll was quite impressive, not to mention those creepy eyes they had. He didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just from being good with his hands, since he's a swordsman. But what's this whole obsession with the exhibition about? Eamon says he even fainted from working so hard on this, and is still trying to keep up with studies and let the adults handle the academy's financial problems. He doesn't need to try so hard since he's a student. But Raymond calls Mr. Amon, saying this is the most comfortable life he's ever had, and in the mountains he had to do everything alone. Food, clothes, friends. He wanted to take care of everything himself, of this life he has now. Eamon thinks about the student's answer. Later he walks thinking that stopping to analyze, he only wanted this academy to end because he has a home to return to. But the children there have nowhere to return to, since each of them has a tragic past anyway. Until a voice questions how he's been. Sloth says there's no better bed than the teacher's desk, and all the bags she had with her were donations from her family that sent them to the academy. Until Anarel approaches calling everyone, because the Emperor agreed to withdraw the suspension recommendation, and besides that, his mental financial support also returned. Reinbelt says that's not all, and a gentleman was moved by Raymond's exhibition, and he'll donate to the academy so Raymond can keep focusing on his art. Eamon questions if the other two have good news, but Mario says no and just came running, and Bless says he was hungry. Anyway, that was it, and now they're going to throw him in the air to express their gratitude, saying his unity reigns forever and is resilient. In short, he's a sucker for continuing to put up with this. Eamon thinks he was supposed to be happy about this, and Amonith Academy was officially back. It's been 6 months since they assigned him to the academy, and the financial problems were fixed and he could live peacefully, but he questions what is this. Anarel says it was the exchange competition. It's a competition where various academies, supervised by the royal family, compete in various fields. The academy will receive a trophy from the royal family, and it's also a chance to let the academies compete every year to expand. Mario says now that the suspension recommendation was removed, they have to participate in the exchange competition, and Amon is against it. He comments it's not the right time, and unlike the tournament, the exchange competition has many more categories, and even the smallest academies have hundreds of students. Anarel denies this since they already signed up, and Eamon questions what's the meeting for then. Mario holds him, saying it could be a good experience, but the guy gets irritated, saying taking a beating won't be good. The professor says his students did well in the other tournament, and manages at least in the magic and swords sector. Eamon just accepts irritated afterward, wanting to know which academy she challenged for the competition. In another place, a man bursts into laughter, saying it was a joke since the ruined academy recently reopened, and they still have the nerve to challenge Bestrick Academy, the best in the Empire. It was time to settle old disputes between the academies and beat his personal record too. Back at Amonith, the protagonist bangs his head on the table saying they're screwed. His academy is going to compete against the best academy in the Empire, and it's not even possible. They have thousands of students and hundreds of teachers, and not just the numbers. All the graduates from there are high-level mages and knights in the nobility. It was like throwing an egg at a rock, but Mario asks him to listen. Even though there are rumors that his academy reopened, most people still think they're in the shit, and if he does well during the exchange competition, Eamon completes that lots of people will want to enter, and Mario confirms. If they win the exchange competition, news of their victory will spread and they'll return to their former glory, but Eamon comments that it's not just a matter of time. Anyway, you could understand the director's intentions, since she wants to revive the academy as quickly as possible and they're going to try, opening a smile on his face, because it won't be him who's going to suffer. Boris almost faints while studying. The protagonist taps him with a stick telling him to wake up, and the guy says he didn't even close his eyes. So he keeps telling them to read the dissertation, and Boris comments that he's way too cruel. Eamon says he needs to hold on because he'll be able to eat as much as he wants. Besides, Chloe needs to stay focused, with the girl talking about how the Bastrode family technique focuses on power. He calls Raymond last, and the guy says he was studying, but the protagonist says he can take it easy. The guy questions if he's going to participate in the swordsman event, but the protagonist says it was a different category. But they must keep reading because especially Chloe and Boris can't leave until they finish reading everything. Boris and Chloe are immersed in the amount of papers, while the protagonist repeats his saying. The weight of the exhibition tournament was starting to return. On the day of the Inter-Academy Exchange Tournament, both stare at each other head-on. Director Benjamin says that Aniril hasn't changed at all even after so much time, and she says it's because she's an elf, but she thought he would have already died of old age. Benjamin analyzes everyone there with extreme coldness, wanting to know if these are the students who are going to participate in the exchange because it seemed like a joke, and the professors aren't much better than that. Benjamin says he envies the Academy's talents, and Anirel responds that it seems his wrinkled eyes are good for something. So they keep arguing, and Amon thinks that she was going on the offensive and doesn't even seem like the director he knows. Mario recognizes someone next. Aspatal Zonasir was a famous magic swordsman from his magic tower who announces he's the Imperial Supervisor. It seemed that both academies were already present, so the exchange competition should begin. The first round will be about magic theory and magic circle construction, and students from both academies must step forward. On Besteric's side, the crowd cheers for Delmond. Unlike the exhibition competition, they only had 4 days to prepare for the exchange competition, and so he had to go all out during preparation. But they're a very prestigious academy, and not even the first opponent is easy, with Anirel telling that he's known for his beauty and magical abilities. Delmond wonders if this is his opponent. Magic was a discipline linked to talent and blood, but he looks more like a commoner of nothing, introducing himself as Meyer Delmond from Bestrick Academy, and Boris does the same. Aspatal says that in this round they'll construct a magic circle, and then they'll enter into a discussion about each other's opinion on the theory behind it. Delmond says he'll start, so he prepares his magic thinking that the commoner should pay attention. Because this was a real magic circle. Aspatal thinks that he can build a magic circle without a medium even being so young, so they tell the student from Amonith Academy to analyze the magic circle. Delmond thinks this magic is way too advanced for him, and only someone with a 4th circle could use it, but Boris says it's a blindness spell. But the circle is way too inefficient, showing that this was the circle he made, but if you remove these 2 outer lines, the mana flows much better. Besides, you don't need this bottom line since the hypothesis that mana needs reinforcement lines was already debunked years ago by Archmage Gelihim. Aspatal says he has a point, and even knows the obscure theory, and now it was his turn to present his magic circle. Delmond thinks he can't even cast magic, and it was pathetic, plus he's only going to draw a training magic circle or something like that, but Boris finishes drawing a complicated magic circle. Delmond wonders what magic circle that is, but everyone recognizes the flaming tempest of the 8th circle. That kid made an incredibly complex circle on the spot, and even a mid-level mage would have difficulty with that, wondering if he memorized the magic circle, but the protagonist thinks yes because he crammed it in at the last minute. Boris questions what that drink is, and Eamon tells him it's a secret tea recipe from Vice Director Bless's tribe. The guy questions what this is, and the protagonist says it was an anti-sleep drug, and the magic of remembering badly for a long time. The next day, he celebrates that Boris finally read all the research papers. The victory of the first round went to Boris from Amonith Academy. Aspatal says he'll remember his name, and after graduating he should look for Brailing from the imperial court, handing an amulet into his hand next. The director celebrates, and Amon says he was proud of him. Anarel explains that this brooch is a symbol of court recruitment, and he secured a position as an imperial mage after graduation. Amon puts his hand on his head, asking if he hadn't told him. If he holds on a little longer, he'll eat all the meat he wants. Boris starts crying next, hugging his teacher tightly. Amon is surprised by this, picking him up since the guy had fainted in his arms, and repeats mentally about imperial mage. Thinking he was a lucky kid, and while he was rotting in this end of the world, his student was selected to be an imperial mage. Benjamin clenches his fists hard, saying he didn't expect that commoner kid would surpass them, wanting to know if there's anyone else at Amonith they should worry about, and his vice director tells him there's a student who placed first in the swordsman competition. The second round is about history, and it seems the student is at least an expert of the sword and will probably participate in the sword round, but he wonders why he was coming. Benjamin thinks that this idiot elf is going to send a swordsman to the history competition. His student received offers to work as a politician and diplomat in various kingdoms, and so he understands a lot about history. The history round was a guaranteed victory for Bestrick Academy, so the test will be that each participant will present a topic that will be debated. So since Amonith Academy won the first round, they should present their discussion topic, please, and Raymond questions what's the meaning of the Marquise's rebellion, but the entire audience makes a commotion next, wondering what kind of topic that is and if he's an Academy student, but Amon thinks this idiot started with such a simple topic. That nerd student starts talking so much that it becomes boring even for the narrator to try to read what it was, and Aspital questions if Raymond has any opinion. But now John chooses the next topic, and the nerd thinks he's going to shut him up, saying that in the territories outside the Empire where Duke Everglow and the Grand Duchy share a border, there was a recent incident, and he'd like to discuss the conflicts. Mario says he chose a very complicated subject, and Amon agrees, since there are several political factors involved. Bestrick Academy has access to various resources and the latest news, but on the other hand, Amonith just overcame financial difficulties, and only has access to old books. So the difference in quality was glaring, and the guy says this one's difficult, wanting to know if he can specify which incident he was talking about, because he mentioned a recent incident, and could be referring to the battle between the common army and mercenaries in the neutral zone, or the Archduke's disappearance. John says the intent is to discuss, so it can be either one, while thinking he hasn't heard of any of them. The protagonist thinks he thought he was only good with the sword. Raymond responds that they'll discuss the conflict with the Grand Duchy caused by a strange incident that happened in Boston Mountain of Everglow territory. John freezes when speaking about it, thinking he has no idea what that is. So he tells the supervisor he doesn't know what it's about, and Aspital responds that it happened 2 years ago, and worsened the conflict between the Grand Duchy and Duke Everglow. But since both sides kept it secret, that incident should have been buried, wanting to know how he found out about it. Rheinbelt appears commenting that it's already Ray's turn, and Anarel says she didn't expect he would come. The old man says he wouldn't miss this for anything since his grandson was participating in a history competition. Aspital recognizes the Divine Sword King, and it must be why he knows. Since Rheinbelt lived in the Boston Mountains of Duke Everglow's territory, he himself had been the cause of the strange incident Raymond mentioned, since he was picking vegetables when some noble children from the Grand Duchy provoked him, only to end up completely destroyed, and it was a pathetic incident that triggered a political dispute, so they kept it quiet. Rheinbelt looks coldly at the judge with extreme coldness. Aspital asks if he observed him now. Rheinbelt says it was really unnecessary for Ray to talk about that incident, and doesn't want it to get worse, so they should keep it low, and Aspital thinks he's intense. But he says John doesn't seem to have anything to say to discuss the topic, and the boy asks for some time, but it ends with Raymond being the winner of the category, and both sides celebrate and complain about it. Benjamin says the next match is mathematics, and thinks they'll crush them in the next round. But Amon says they forfeit this category. As far as he knows, there's a forfeit system in these exchange matches, and there's no problem using an existing rule, and Aspital says forfeiting is a huge disgrace. The protagonist says he only has 3 students participating in his academy, and can't let 2 students participate in 2 rounds each, nor 1 student in 3. It would be too exhausting for them, and he values his students more than his honor. But Amon thinks that of course it's a lie, and he doesn't even have a math teacher. Besides, when he asked the kids to look, telling them they had 5 apples and Boris ate 3 of them, then Raymond brought 3 more, and Chloe along with him ate 1 each, and then Boris ate 2 more. They want to know how many apples were left in total, and Chloe raises her hand, saying they're going to take Boris's life since he ate 5 apples by himself. Boris trembles in fear, saying he doesn't even like apples. Raymond tries to answer that 3 or 4 were left, but the answer was wrong. Eamon thinks that right there he was finished in this category, and so they gave up competing in it. Benjamin says the next one will be the science category, but Amanith Academy forfeits that too. So victory by forfeit goes to Bestrick Academy, making it a tie of 2-2, and the director is surprised. Anarel questions where his smile is, because this was the victory he wanted so much. The director thinks this was a cursed elf, and they didn't achieve victory. It seems it was just handed to them. This is the same emptiness as when Amanith Academy closed its doors because of the suspension recommendation, and he spent the whole night elaborating a duel plan. But whatever anyway. They'll be the winners in the end, and the match will be in the sword category. Olivier Basket, a swordmaster and prodigy swordsman, appears there. He thinks of Raymond next, reflecting that he would be the only one worthy of being his opponent, but he ran away like this. Besides, he'll have to fight against this child, and it was annoying. Anarel says he didn't send Raymond even though he's a master swordsman and wants to know if Chloe gets hurt, but the protagonist asks her to relax. This isn't a real battle, it was just a match in the end. Olivier advances toward her, saying not to hold a grudge and he'll end this quickly, but Chloe advances beneath him next. Olivier is completely shocked by this, wanting to know where she was at that moment, but Chloe appears at his back with her sword, then strikes his shoulder with force. She receives a bit, and Olivier wonders when she got there. The girl stops in front of him, moving her sword while he copies the action, so both strike each other with extreme force. Chloe thinks that Mr. Amon was right. When she imagines them as pigs, she's not afraid of any of them. Olivier questions what she was dreaming about and moves his sword. Chloe advances, thinking that this guy right in front of her was just another wretched pig whose life she could take. The teachers are surprised by this, while Chloe gains 4 more points anyway. Olivier says she was lucky to get those points. But the girl questions what did he say, and he should speak like a person, since he's a disgusting pig.